Welcome back, everybody. Appreciate you stopping by, as always. The oldest known slave society was the Mesopotamian and Sumerian civilizations in the Iraq-Iran region between 6000 to 2000 BCE. It seems like slavery is always a topic in America. From time to time, with each national current event that seems to get our attention, if there's an issue of race, or if there's an issue of July 4th even, which we just had this month, it seems to be brought up quite a bit, especially with the founders and all the information about them owning slaves and which ones did and didn't. And it is true, the majority of the founders of America were slave owners. In my opinion, immature view on history of America would conclude that America is founded on slavery. America wasn't founded on the idea of slavery existing. It was, unfortunately, a sad reality of the time, and has been a sad reality of our world for the last several thousand years. I think Americans need to look at slavery with a world perspective, and not just specifically on America. I think it throws off a proper gauge of how slavery is viewed in America, because when we talk about it, or when it gets brought up, or when we celebrate July 4th, we view it from the lens that America is so unique. It was so terrible. It was so brutal, which it was. But we talk about it like it was so brutal and terrible because it happened here and that we were the only people to do it. Couldn't be further from the truth. It's not an easy subject to tackle. There's so many different angles. It's not to dismiss. It's not to recognize the absolute atrocities. And history does get told through the lens of the Southern view of history when we talk about America. I don't think it does justice to the people in the North. I don't think it does justice to the nearly 300,000 white men that lost their lives, that were fighting for their fellow black men and black women and families in the South to be freed. Slavery is a brutal, brutal reality of the world. When slaves were purchased to come to North America, they were part of a 2 to 3 million person slave trade. The Americas had bought about 400,000 slaves from that group. I think even Brazil had received over 1 million slaves. Yet, in a lot of modern discussion, we don't mention anyone else's sins except for America. I don't think it tells the full story, and I don't think it's appropriate when we only talk about America's specific sins. That's not to downgrade them. That's not to dismiss how bad they were. Again, it's all terrible. It sucks. With any positive thing that's happened in history, there has been some nasty, nasty things behind it. Land had to be conquered. Men and women had to die. Wars had to be fought. Governments had to be overthrown. Kingdoms had to be overthrown. The reason I think it matters today is because if you're going around in 2023 with this heavy, heavy weight on your soul, on your mind, about how racist and how terrible America is for having slaves, it's not a whataboutism. It's not a deflection. But if you truly view it in the scope of this has been a part of human history for thousands of years, it should lessen the blow of how a moral atrocity that it was. From these terrible situations, America is still striving to be the greatest country there ever was. I agree, there's crappy things about America still today. Tons of things we could change. I think a big point people forget is that there were already talks of ending slavery before we even seceded from Great Britain. At the time, the logistics of it, the fact that our nation would most likely crumble and we could never even get off the ground to eventually abolish slavery completely, many founders thought it was just an impossibility and you would split the nation before it could even start. They had to do what they had to do. There were already discussions to break slavery off very, very early. Economically, they wouldn't have been able to fight a war. There's just several approaches and nuances that not many Americans get taught. We get taught that every white person in America came from a slave family or owned slaves from their past, etc., etc., etc. Less than 5% of Americans living today are connected to a slave owner family. You may think this is like an apology tour or something, or defending slavery, and it's not. But I still think the topic of slavery only gets viewed in this North versus South antebellum mindset, and rightfully so, because we are Americans, and so we view it in that light. But when you zoom out and you look at the world as a whole and realize that slavery has been a part of human civilization for thousands of years, not justifying it, it's a horrible thing. The reason America was unique is because we fought for every single person to be free. Did it take 100 years too long? Yep, it did. Since the inception of our country, it did. Were there other blacks that owned blacks? Yep. Were there other whites that owned Native Americans? Yep. Were there other Native Americans that owned blacks? Yep. But if you can see past the atrocities of mankind and seeing that we are in a better place in 2023, then in my mind, you're looking at the perspective of human life the right way. We are progressing. That doesn't mean we don't need to talk about the past. We do. We have to recognize reality. The difference is we can't look at the past and history and come up with a revisionist history and lie and misinform and not get educated about the reality of the situation. And yes, some used religion, some used race to justify the holding and selling of human beings for labor. It's terrible stuff. So in closing, I think if you can recognize, to know how lucky that you are to live now, today, 2023, I think it'd really open your eyes and you really start to change how you look at life with a positive attitude, despite man's sins. We'll catch you on the next one, folks.